I think we're all kind of at a stage in our lives where we were really hungry to do something.
We were young and naive.
Young and inexperienced and had no idea what they were doing.
I wanted to show people that I could do this.
It was our first game, and I don't think we knew quite what we had.
The interactive title of the year.
The movie license done by a small team of inexperienced developers and somehow ended up being the greatest first-person shooter of its era.
This is one of the best video games of all time.
Couldn't ask for a better cocktail recipe.
Here is your spy playground.
The guns, the gadgets, the cars, the girls, the memorable villains, amazing exotic settings.
One of the most important video games yet made. It had a transformative effect on the industry. You can look at the video game landscape today and trace back its origins in GoldenEye.
GoldenEye is one of those wonderful games that almost splits the game industry into two times. There's before GoldenEye and there's after GoldenEye.
You know, Halo, Call of Duty, Medal of Honor, Battlefield, all of that goes back to GoldenEye.
First-person shooters were really this PC elite genre.
3D gaming was really coming to the fore for the first time.
Social element, the friendship element, the skill and personal achievement, right? It's one package that sums up all the reasons I play and want to make games.
The 1990s, a time of innocence, optimism, and social cohesion. And Spice Girls. There were no mobile phones, no social media, the internet was but a whisper on the wind, and TV consisted entirely of the same old channels we'd had for decades. The video games industry was still young, widely considered to be the realm of children and toy makers, but it was changing fast as game makers were still discovering what games could be. Many video games have graced our screens over the years, few are played decades later. Even fewer change the way we play. This is the story of a game that did just that. Rare was founded in the 1980s by brothers Tim and Chris Stamper. The Stamper brothers began their journey developing a series of acclaimed titles for the ZX Spectrum and built themselves quite a reputation for innovative, high-quality games. In 1985, their work caught the eye of Japanese gaming giant Nintendo. In fact, Nintendo loved what they saw so much they invested in the fledgling outfit, taking a 49% shareholding in the company. This relationship would go down as one of the most fruitful collaborations in video game history. Together, they would go on to create some of the most beloved video games of the 90s.
What's amazing is that Rare is this really... at the time, it was this really reclusive developer. They didn't tell you anything. They were very kind of secret, and so secret that not many people knew where they were based. And they are based on what used to be a farm in the Midlands.
Middle of England, a barn, groups of people that had really not done a lot of video game stuff before were killing it.
Twycross is absolutely, there's nothing in it. Twycross is a village that contains, it's got one pub, it's got a private school. A bit further up the road, there's Twycross Zoo, which is quite famous, but that is it.
You have this extremely talented, cutting-edge game development studio out in the middle of nowhere,
right? In countryside in England.
I mean, over that period of, what, 6 years, they'd done some of the best 2D platformers, some of the best 3D platformers, one of the best fighting games, one of the best racing games, and certainly one of the best first-person shooters.
People underestimate the influence of Tim Stamper and Chris Stamper. They were just absolutely always in complete sync. There was never a point in time where those two guys didn't agree on something. There was always absolute solidarity, and they knew exactly what they wanted. There was never a time you'd say, we're not sure. Tim would always know how it needs to be for that to be fantastic.
The whole point of Rare was to do things differently, to not just make the same games that have come before. But it works for them. They're kind of isolated a little bit in that they're on this kind of farm-style campus. They've got different barns, so different buildings where the different teams make different games, and you're just in this little Rare world.
You know, when you buy a Nintendo game, it'd have the Nintendo seal of quality. To me, the Rare logo back then was the Nintendo seal of quality. You knew you were getting an amazing game.
You used to always want to make the fact that the Rare logo should sell the game without even knowing about the review. But reading the review, you see that blue R on that game box, you buy it.
They just didn't make bad games.
Rare was a very sort of clandestine place in some respects. Nobody ever did interviews. No one knew what we were up to till the game came out. No one had any idea, because Tim and Chris weren't interested in fame. We just work on the games, we focus on the games, make them the best they can be, we put them out, and they do the talking.
Rare was a very important and iconic developer back during the 90s. You know, it really pushed the boundaries, not just with the N64. So they developed Donkey Kong Country. It's a game which used pre-rendered 3D graphics, and for it to be on that console at that time, it looked amazing.
They were able to render these just gorgeous 3D models and then make them 2D sprites, but they maintained almost the same level of graphical fidelity as their original source models had. It just made the Super Nintendo look like it could be the next generation console. It wasn't old, it was new again.
It was evident back in like Donkey Kong Country, where they were using 3D development stuff in a 2D environment to give the illusion of a 3D world. Nobody was doing that at all.
So in the late 90s, we saw a lot of innovation around how games are played, how games control, how camera systems work, how progression in levels work, all of that stuff. It was kind of this wild west of developers trying a whole bunch of different things. And then, you know, over time, certain things stuck around, certain things went away.
The PC market was absolutely booming thanks to the advent of 3D graphics cards.
Welcome to the world of Doom, a hellish nightmare for the more weak.
Because the PC was the home of the first-person shooter.
We didn't call them first-person shooters, we called them Doom clones, because everyone made games that were kind of like Doom.
First-person shooters, let's remember, at the time weren't a thing. They weren't a genre. They were just shooters in a 3D, in a 3D environment.
The landscape for first-person shooters was pretty young back then. It was more about monster closets, fast-paced shooting, skill-based gameplay, but not really campaign-based storytelling and puzzle solving.
For me, FPS was just id games. It was Wolfenstein and Doom, because that's all I knew.
And then moving into Quake and Unreal around the same era as one another.
You had kind of, violent games beginning to become popular. And so you needed the consoles to kind of, to match that.
I'd seen really rad, awesome 3D stuff in the arcades, playing all sorts of video games like Virtua Cop and things. But the concept of having a three-dimensional first-person shooter game at home was revolutionary.
This transition from like Mega Drive and Super Nintendo to the PlayStation or even like the Sega Saturn, like adapting to these new forms is introducing all these new challenges and problems.
You'd seen some experimentations with 3D on the Super Nintendo, things like Star Fox and F-Zero and Pilot Wings, and it was sort of fake 3D. It wasn't really good 3D.
Most interesting is how the different developers kind of used this newfound power of using the third dimension, like how they would use it to create new experiences.
It was also around this sort of time that you had Tomb Raider. Tomb Raider was made in Britain. You had Grand Theft Auto. Grand Theft Auto was made in Scotland. there were a lot of very kind of ambitious, creative UK developers trying to push the bounds of this new 3D world and what we could do with it. And they were having worldwide hits.
I've been to lots of interviews in London. Yeah. It was like, great, London. And then I ended up in a farmhouse in Warwickshire. It's quite bizarre.
The actual layout was you have the big farmhouse itself, which was sorting out all the minutiae of the day, you know, making sure the company worked and all that sort of stuff. And then there were literally barns where they used to keep the horses, and these had been turned into offices. And each team was in one of the barns, and where the horse sort of stalls were, they'd been turned into our individual offices.
They were each big enough for 2 or 3 people. When I started, I had one to myself, which was right next to the creche. So I got to hear kids playing all day.
Of course, there was no internet, so it was like, get on with it. You're in your computer now, get on with it. But it was really nice, that barn sort of feel to it.
That was very much how Rare worked. It was kind of, everyone was in their little silo. And there was a Donkey Kong barn, and there was the barn that ended up where Banjo was. There was the Killer Block, people making Killer Instinct.
I was 22 when I joined Rare. I think the others were mostly about the same or a little bit older. Well, I was straight out of uni, so I'd never worked on an actual game that had been released.
24. And no experience at all in making games. Rare was my first job out of the university, so.
I was a scientist, so I was at Oxford University, and I'd done my degree and PhD, and I worked in molecular structure determination.
So I was about 23, I guess. I had not got a degree at that point. I dropped out of architecture.
Like for someone like me, I really genuinely thought I'd just end up like a tramp. I did the university things, messed around in bands for years and years to get to 33, which is 11 years is a long time. Just living at home with my mother. I don't know, I would have just been a pub rocker, making 30 quid a night probably, to this day.
So when I joined Rare, I just turned 23. All my experience up to that point was playing games and wanting to do music for games.
As well as the artists and programmers, they wanted a system administrator to go and run their Silicon Graphics network. And at the time, I was running a Silicon Graphics network as part of my job in the lab. And I'd had a bad day. And I kind of thought, well, yeah, screw it, I'll apply for this.
This was my first job. It was a good job. I was earning more money than I ever had done before. And I was getting to work on James Bond.
Name's Bond. James Bond.
New project had come in from Nintendo. They'd got the rights to GoldenEye. And they'd come to Rare and said, will you lead a new team to make this GoldenEye game?
The offer for a movie game, a movie tie-in game, came up to Rare. It was kind of the last thing anyone wanted to do.
They didn't really like making adult games. They wanted to make broad appeal family games. So GoldenEye was a little bit out of the ordinary for them.
Martin Hollis was the guy who stepped up and said, okay, I'll do this. This could be kind of fun. And everyone else was like, great, cool. We want to keep making our own games.
Martin Hollis, a young, ambitious university graduate from the south of England, had only been with Rare a short time before the opportunity to make GoldenEye came up. His total experience working in games was a brief stint working on a coin-op conversion of Killer Instinct. And that was it. He was, however, a massive Bond fan, as evidenced by this homage to the infamous Bond gun barrel sequence he made with his brothers as a young lad, shown here at a GDC 2012 GoldenEye talk. But making a game about Bond would be a much larger challenge. Hollis would have to build a team and a game from scratch. Martin's first recruit to the team was programming prodigy Mark Edmonds. A man of few words, Mark was in charge of the core engine and AI systems. Joining him was architecture graduate turned lead artist Carl Hilton, and populating Carl's environments with character models and animations was Brett Jones. Duncan Botwood came aboard next as a designer to work on level progression and mission structures. Programmer Steve Ellis was brought in to code the weapons and explosion effects, and David Doak joined to help craft the missions, storylines, and objectives. But what of GoldenEye's signature soundscape? Well, that came courtesy of Graham Norgate and Grant Kirkhope, with the dynamic duo providing the music and sound effects. And last but not least, Adrian Smith was the final piece of the puzzle, joining the team to help with effects and UI.
The level of ambivalence in terms of the studio that's managing that project the publisher that's funding the project, the license holder who also has a lot of say in what that game should be. You know, James Bond is one of the biggest IPs in pop culture. And everyone's like, they'll make it.
Yeah, Martin Hollis came in one day. Didn't know him. But Martin said, I've been offered you for my new team. I'm like, oh great, what is it? He said, well, do you like James Bond movies? And at the time I was thinking, you know, I'd love James Bond movies. I was thinking, but video game James Bond movies, like.
In the late 90s, every major film that came along had to have a licensed video game attached. And this was not because Hollywood, you know, particularly valued or respected the video game industry. It was like, this is a really useful marketing tool.
Nobody believed that a GoldenEye game would work. Licensed tie-in games at the time were like a toy, you know? You had the baseball cap, you had the lunchbox, and you had the video game.
Movie license games often failed because the gameplay wasn't good, right? They were cranked out to just kind of hit a deadline and kind of resemble the franchises that were so popular.
We all got Bond. There wasn't some style sheet that we needed to read.
We were James Bond fans. We all wanted to be James Bond. That was the whole point.
And I was able to rattle off a load of kind of Bond ideas because I'd read all the books and obviously seen all the films and so on. So I just wouldn't stop talking for about half an hour about all the things we could do with it.
I was a big Bond fan, so I watched all the Bonds.
When the movies came out, they were the biggest movie of the year always. The best effects, the best music, the best... everything was spectacular in Bond films, right? So you always knew you were in for a great ride on a Bond movie.
The first few days, I do remember us sitting down and talking about what kind of a game it should be. I used to love playing Spy Hunter in the arcades. Maybe it's a sort of Spy Hunter sort of top-down driving game.
They wanted to do something for the Super Nintendo, the SNES. I assume it would have been vastly different given the different powers of the two machines, probably a 2D platformer.
Everyone was working on Super Nintendo at the time. And Martin had said to them, I will do it, but he wanted to work on the new console that was coming along.
Martin had the vision. You know, he was the only guy that had actually done a game before, so he was the one powering through this and saying, you know, I think we'd like to do this, I think we'd like to do that.
Especially in those early phases, it's Mark Edmonds and Martin Hollis, but Mark was the engineer. Mark essentially built the core engine and an awful lot of the subsequent tools that were available to the rest of the team to start building all the level designs and create all these really fun, unique experiences.
Because you have to remember, first-person shooters got off to a much slower start on consoles. Yes, there were ports of games like Wolfenstein 3D and Doom on earlier systems like the Super Nintendo and the 32X, but technically they were really ugly and kind of just stumbled compared to the PC counterparts.
At the time, people were like, well, shooter won't work on consoles because you need a PC, you need mouse control because it's more accurate, or you need a keyboard because you've got so many different buttons and so many different options.
They were much better suited, that sort of game, to the PC because you can use the mouse to aim, you can use the keyboard to move your character, and you can map different keys to different actions. On a video game console controller, you're much more limited in what you could do.
At some point, details about the Ultra 64, they were boasting about all these new power that this console would have. And at some point, Martin got a brainstorm and decided that actually this sort of game would work in 3D.
We all knew it was coming. No one had seen it, no one knew much about it, but we knew it was going to be a 3D console.
With the early through mid-90s, you're going through this massive technological upheaval. Like, consoles are adapting and being built and being released like really frequently and really quickly. The hardware is changing, and in turn the software that we have to build for it is changing as well. Like this transition from 2D into 3D gaming, we don't really know, like, what's the standard by which we're going to build 3D games?
Because the 3D thing was a new thing, there wasn't a body of people with those experiences or those skills, so you're always kind of taking a punt on people. So like Carl, for instance, so Carl Hilton was he was an architecture graduate, you know, and he hadn't really, he'd done a bit of messing around doing 3D modeling, but not much.
The developers are relatively new to this experience. Many of them had never shipped a game before, and given a tremendous amount of freedom to experiment and play around with ideas and throwing things in ad hoc to see whether it sticks.
And then we were talking about shooters, particularly the Virtua Cop games.
Originally, it was supposed to be an on-rails game. The feel of that is quite different.
So you would go through each level at the same pace, kind of almost Star Fox style or Time Crisis, that sort of thing, and it would be the same each time, and you just have to kind of improve your score each time.
You didn't have control over movement, but you could aim, just in some of the classic kind of arcade on-rail shooters.
And they put everything in to make it play like Virtua Cop, and then everyone was playing it and going, it's not any fun. It looks like Virtua Cop, it moves like Virtua Cop, it's got the Bond, but it's not fun.
GoldenEye was one of those games that kept on getting delayed and obviously missed the release of the movie and even the home video release.
It has the markings of like a small indie outfit now who's got far more resource and budget than anyone would potentially imagine, with no constraint on, right, you've got to ship this in 6 months. We'll keep paying the bills, but could you try and ship something?
Nintendo is not like many other video game companies in that it was able to say it cares first and foremost about the quality of the games that appear on its hardware. So it's less about we need to hit this release date so that we maximize our profits because we're tying in with the film's release. It's more like, no, we're going to wait on this until it's right, until it's ready, until it's good.
No, there was concerns that it wasn't a very Nintendo-ish product. It was quite, we got told repeatedly it was too dark and it was violent. It was like, to which our response was, well, it's dark because the film's dark, and it's violent because it's James Bond and he kills people.
There's a very well-known story now that Martin Hollis tells about late into the game's development receiving a fax from Shigeru Miyamoto, who is still the most famous video game designer in the world, and certainly was at that time. Sort of giving his feedback on GoldenEye, and he said he doesn't like the violence. He says, it sort of feels tragic, and is there no way that at the end of the game, you, as Agent 007, can visit the hospital ward where all of the people that you've taken down during the course of the game are sort of holed up, and can you not work your way down the beds, shaking everyone's hands? It's, obviously a very funny story, but it also illustrates, I think, something about Nintendo and Miyamoto's approach to video game design, and probably their nervousness about a game like GoldenEye appearing on their flagship hardware. At one point, they were even saying, oh, we're not sure about this, maybe we just cancel it, and because they'd rather lose that money and preserve their reputation as a fantastic video game publisher than they would to recoup some of that money and put something else out that's substandard.
So let's do a quick summary, shall we? We have an inexperienced, ragtag group of university graduates working in a barn somewhere in the English countryside on a game based off a movie, a game about a spy with a license to kill, to be played on a console that didn't exist yet for the company that brought you Princess Peach and Zelda. Get all that?
Season. It's the new Nintendo 64. So what's the big deal, and why is Toys R Us already sold out?
When we all got our production N64s and everyone had Mario and like Pilot Wings and stuff, but particularly Mario, literally people were sitting in offices watching other people playing Mario, and everyone was going, jaw drop. From the moment you pick up that game, it just says, go, explore.
Was symbolic of the time that, you had this new level of freedom, afforded by games like GoldenEye 007 and Super Mario 64 and Zelda Ocarina of Time. There was I think an emphasis from a gameplay perspective to get the players to go off and explore.
I remember the first time seeing Super Mario 64, and it was really the first time I'd seen a 3D game, and it was like the world had changed. And we're right on this tipping era that we'll never see again in the same way, of moving from 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions, which was such a tremendous shift in the way that not only games would be made, but also thought about, but also played.
So that just blew people's minds. You could wander around doing stuff that you'd never been able to do before, exploring the game in a way that you'd never been able to.
That curiosity of just like, oh, what's that over there? N64 games and GoldenEye specifically, which led me to be the games tester that I am now, That curiosity of just like, let's zoom into that with a sniper rifle. There's a thing over there. How do we get over there? Don't know, we'll find out. And then you go to facility and you poke around all the corners and you see some flasks on the vent and you're like, who put flasks up there?
It's just had this go anywhere, do anything kind of flavor to it. Even though it's not really an open world game, a lot of the levels kind of feel like you can kind of go everywhere, go anywhere, and just play around with it. And so it was just such an open feeling.
Before GoldenEye, most first-person shooters operated with the Doom clone mentality. Shoot everything that moves, collect the keys, go through the doors, find the exit, rinse and repeat. GoldenEye, depending on the difficulty you selected, would give you different objectives.
It's not just A to B. Some of them are A to B, but it's A to B via objectives C, D, and E. Like, here's a level. This is what you need to do in the level before you leave.
Doom had it to a point, and Quake had it to a point with its keycards, right? The blue, the gold, the red. But it was kind of rudimentary because it was early 90s gaming, you know? GoldenEye come out, and it was just like, no, we have to talk to this character over here. That's never happened to me before in a video game in terms of FPS. I have to then look at my watch to get something, throw it at a thing. It was doing so many things new and fresh at the time. But looking back, like, it completely rewrote the rules for video games, FPS and otherwise.
It wasn't until, I would say, 1997, kind of the year that first-person shooters exploded on the Nintendo 64, when you had this perfect union of a controller that was up to the job of playing FPS and hardware that was up to the job of running and displaying FPS, that the genre really took off on consoles.
Within the year of GoldenEye coming out in 1997, there was Doom 64, which isn't a port of Doom, it's a completely separate Doom game that was made with id Software's blessing. Hexen 64, which is a direct port of the game, but also Turok Dinosaur Hunter.
It was very impressive from a lot of standpoints. Very complex worlds were built. The characters were not sprites anymore. They were fully 3D again and had pretty intricate animations.
When you see something like that and you look at your own work, you know, and all you can see are the things that are wrong with it, you know, you're thinking, oh God, you know, we're miles behind on this. I remember being really worried because it had very nice looking art and it ran really smoothly. It had really good frame rate because they had the fog a lot of the time, and these dinosaurs would run out of the fog at you at a really nice frame rate. You'd be like, oh, that's nice. We did look at that and think, do we need to go back and try and get the game to run faster? Is there anything else I can do? Should we be turning off the Z buffer and things like that? Yeah, it was a real benchmark for us.
So I started building the dam without any real technical knowledge. And I was like playing around with the size of it, and we realized we could take the movie as a source for sure. We could also look at the set models and the set diagrams that they'd drawn out, that they built.
And he just built the dam, and then we put it in, and it's like, whoa. You know, so
we ended up with this real sprawling mass of a level that was running at an abysmally low frame rate.
So then that's why you have the tunnels leading up to it, was to try and cut as much of the views off as possible, you know, and then I went through and basically hacked as many polys out as I could. There'd be a big thing that Martin put up which would show you the frame rate that you currently had, so I could spin around and look at what he was doing, and then suddenly you spin and suddenly the frame rate would drop horrendously. It's like, right, what's over there? Okay, go in, hack around.
That was a kind of awakening for me, like, oh yeah, it's got to run, okay. And
the engine was great because I could sit there on my machine and play with stuff and then immediately make the level, put it in the game, and then try it out again. So I could just go through this iterative process of just hacking away at this. So you start off with levels that look fantastic, and by the time I'd finished with them, they were sort of a bare bones.
And we got to go to Leavesden Studios where they were filming GoldenEye, and we had a day's visit there. And because I had this very rare thing called the digital camera at the time, which was this massive heavy camera, my job was to go around and film and, you know, try and get reference for everything. And we saw St. Petersburg where they had the tank chase, and that was all still up. And then inside one of the actual studios was the huge, you know, the villain's lair set at the end. And we saw that while it was in its pristine condition. Then we went back the second time, we saw it in its blown up condition.
Martin was very pragmatic about stuff. It's like, You go off and make what you want to make, and then we'll look at it and work out how we're going to get it to work. It was all very, very cooperative. It was never like, this is what you do, this is how you do it, don't break these rules. It was much more, what kind of things do you need?
A good example is the frigate. That's in it because in the film, there's that helicopter is on a frigate in Monaco. So Carl had built the frigate, and we had a helicopter model, and that was it. So it's like, well, okay, so what are you going to do in that level? Maybe you're trying to rescue hostages. Well, that sounds like it might work. Okay, well, let's roll with that.
Someone would come back in and go, actually, Mark, what would also be great, can we do this? Can we have them like dodge roll or hide behind cover? Like, okay, like that's not in there now. And then a couple of days later, boom, it appears in the source.
I was then doing a lot of the gun modelling, so I was working in conjunction with Mark Edmonds, not only to get the front end in, because I had to model all the hands. It was myself and Mark that came up with the HUD. And I should have trademarked that, because the HUD was pretty much then the go-to front end for any of the consoles.
It was always, what can we do? What can we create? What sort of things can we do? How do we do it?
Creates this kind of crazy cycle of iteration. Everything that Mark Edmonds was doing and building that code base, but also allowing the designers that kind of level of flexibility to just create whatever they wanted. He was working really hard on this whole back end that was reduced into like bytecode, that was really performant and ran super quick on, you know, what was ultimately very limited hardware on the N64.
Under the watchful eye of the Stampers, the team would work long days and weekends, polishing and refining the gameplay, levels, and difficulty. They would even bring in elements of the extended James Bond universe to create a game overflowing with content and creativity. But would it pay off?
These days, you can load up a synth patch, put your finger on a keyboard, it's this huge, great swathe of sound. It's just, you know, it's incredible. You know, it's just amazing. But we couldn't do that then. Most of the sounds in GoldenEye are probably 16 or 11 kilohertz. They're right down at the bottom end. And if like bass drums, you put them in at 8. You know, so like that's you know, it's a quarter of the quality that you would get on a CD.
The gas plant music is a particular one. You know, that opening kind of do do. When I hear that, I still get a bit goosepimply about it. The music and the soundscape and the pacing and stuff, it's like, no, you're Bond.
What I love, I think, is it sounds like a score. Every song feels like it's come from the same soundtrack. It feels cohesive, and that's very difficult to do. Their ability to carve a theme and create an emotion and a feeling that instantly linked you to whatever your goal was, whatever your mission was, but also whatever the environment was, whether it's a snowy sort of area or a sneaky area through a facility.
GoldenEye, I think, is an excellent example of having a believable world that you can explore. And you add kind of, you know, atmospheric music, and then you've got action, etc. You're beginning to build the sense of a narrative-led first-person shooting experience, which obviously we have, you know, everywhere now.
Their ability to use nothing more than a limited sound palette and a series of notes is what makes that a great score.
A lot of thought had gone into creating, again, a believable oral landscape.
When Graham Norgate is doing the sound design, the gun sounds in that game are really, really good for their time. That soundscape was crafted with just absolute love and respect.
It's a luxury of being in-house. We could play the game. So you'd load up Severnaya, walk through it, play it, and you'd get the idea for it. And you could write something and have that playing whilst you're playing the level again and, you know, iterate.
That's another person who is a talented person at the height of their skills trying to do something really well. And then it all came together.
When I joined the project, there weren't any effects, really. So I think the first thing that I worked on was explosions.
Everything explodes. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, everything did explode if you shot it long enough, I think, pretty much.
But it's part of the world. It's like you're in this world and there's this kind of brittle consequence for things and this escalating calamity if you do something wrong and this explodes and then this scientist gets blown across the room.
Yeah, I spent ages working on that. I think it was more than a month on the explosions. Effects are always one of the most expensive things. They can have quite a large impact on the frame rate of the game, the responsiveness.
That sense of immersion and impact on the game world is another thing that's going to keep bringing players back to keep playing, because it's a space that they can control in more of a way than they could with things like Doom.
It's not in Doom. There's not that collateral damage and the idea that the environment is mutable in some way. It was something that was really important to us.
A job I was not expecting when I answered an advertisement for a game designer and document writer was to be stuffed into a sweaty neoprene suit and asked to fall over. But one day, I was asked to put on a sweaty neoprene suit that had been used for Kill Instinct and to fall over a lot.
I would have Mr. Botwood there all covered in the markers, and then depending on how he was going to get killed at that point, he would either have a rope around him and I'd yank him, or he would get pushed, or he would get kicked in the knee. You know, you see those guys and they get shot in the shoulder and you see them do that. That's me literally going like that and pushing him on the shoulder until he moves, because you can't anticipate, because otherwise there's that... He was battered. He was really battered.
I remember one time Tim Stamper got the team into the conference room and explained to them that it's not a university project and it does need to be finished at some point.
Regardless of the game being late and missing deadline after deadline, right, you know, that it wasn't because we were putting our feet up.
I believe they were all in their late 20s or early 30s. Most of them were single. They could work 100-hour weeks. You know, whether we think that's good or not, with hindsight, that was something that they wanted to do and did willingly, and we were the beneficiaries of that toil.
It was like a company culture of you don't just go home at 5 o'clock, that's for sure.
Everyone used to work late at Ray. We used to like being there, right?
Right from the start, they'd be there till midnight and working weekends and stuff.
You didn't have to stay, but it was kind of assumed that you would. So most of the time we did.
We thought the game was going to be really bad. So that was always the thing. It's like, A, there's not enough variety. It's going to be boring. It's just running and shooting. And also, we're not going to get all the levels finished.
It was hugely late, and it was massively full of bugs. There was just so many things wrong with it that it sort of became that game that we all thought would never actually come out in the end.
Hi, I'm Ken Lobb. I'm here to tell you about the Nintendo 64 hardware.
Ken Lobb was a big fan of the game, and I mean, we had a lot of support, particularly from America.
And here we have the controller ports. I'd like you to notice that we have 1, 2, 3, 4.
Nintendo 64 shipped with 4 controller ports, right? And Mario Kart 64 obviously demonstrated to the world how to properly use those 4 ports.
You know, from the very offset, the machine comes with four players. Now, you still have to buy 2 other controllers, but not if your mates bring them around with them, right? So, as a developer, you're then beginning to think, let's try and use it. Perhaps there is something in here.
That was a big departure from having to configure your LAN and having multiple copies of every game and playing across all these different monitors.
I'm going to say around about April or May '97 we started work on it. Seems insanely close,
In the meantime, Nintendo America is going, you are finishing the game, aren't you? You're not trying to put multiplayer in or anything, are you? No, we're not. No. It's fine. Yeah, we're finishing the game.
There was no way Martin was going to be able to go to management and say, you know what, we'd really like to put multiplayer in, because it's just like, no, you're failing to do the thing you're supposed to be doing. You don't be asking for more time. I just remember the day we showed it to Ken, because Ken would come over every kind of couple of months or something to Rare. I remember him coming over and we'd set up. It was in the office where Steve and Duncan were. We had TV and we had the 4 controllers sitting. So that was the thing, because we came in. I just remember we walked in with Ken. Ken, we've got something to show you. And he's like, yeah, wow. I think Ken was all there. He just like, oh my God, you guys. It's like, yeah, it works.
And he was so excited by it that he wanted to be the one who revealed it to the testers at Nintendo.
So Treehouse is NOA's, Nintendo of America's testing and kind of like game evaluation department, which Ken Lobb was heavily involved in. And we started to get feedback from them, which was, oh, you know, people are coming in and playing at the weekend. It's like, you know, everyone wants to be testing your game, all that kind of stuff. Going to E3 was kind of seen as a break for us because we were close to gold and there was a big testing push while we were there.
When we were at E3, we had the smallest stand because nobody really knew what we were doing, but it was played all the time.
We had a playable version on the floor and the booths were absolutely rammed. I remember watching everyone playing it and just really enjoying it. So you thought, okay, well, this is good.
But it was being played all the time. The entire time, you know, you were there, you could just see people playing GoldenEye. It was busy, really busy the whole time.
Bolstered by the positive feedback from E3 and testing, the team head into the final stretch with their spirits high. All their hard work and dedication appeared to be paying off, but just as the game was about to be shipped, an order came through from Mission Headquarters.
Yes, I made Timothy Dalton, Roger Moore, and Sean Connery. And I made them all particularly because I gave them all different types of jackets. So one of them had a white one on, one had a little red carnation, one of them had the double-breasted suit. So yeah, I have pictures of them all because I definitely made them.
And fax, I think it was in those days, from saying you can't have the other Bonds in it, we don't have the rights.
There is one cartridge with all 4 Bonds in, and I think I know who has it at the moment, but we had to take them out because Sean Connery wouldn't let us use his likeness.
In a somewhat ceremonial goodbye, the team played one final death match. Doak, Hollis, Edmonds, and Hilton took part in a 3-hour marathon session to decide who was the ultimate James Bond.
So we thought, well, we need to have a final game. So we all sat around one evening and played that. And yeah, I can't remember who won. It wouldn't have been me. But I usually played Roger Moore because he was my favourite.
When we were making it, we were just trying to get it finished. That was an overarching memory of particularly the last year was just, can we just please get it finished, because it's just taking forever.
You get to the end of the game and you are blind to what's good about it, and all you can see is all the things that were on your wish list that you haven't had the time to do. So you kind of only see its flaws.
You see all the things that are wrong with it. You know, we knew the frame rate was awful in places. There were loads of art that I did that we didn't manage to get in. There were game ideas that we didn't get in. It was late and we knew the film had long since gone. So, you know, whether anyone was going to be remotely interested in it when it came out, I had no idea at all.
After working some utterly back-breaking hours, the game was finally deemed finished and sent to the distributors. GoldenEye 007 released on the 25th of August, 1997.
GoldenEye was not a smash hit on day one, like in the way that the really big games are today.
GoldenEye 007 not only defined a generation, but defied all expectation.
It was more word of mouth and sort of a snowball effect.
When it did finally release and everyone started playing it and people started playing the multiplayer, there was a real buzz around it. People were talking about, people talking about the playgrounds and talking about work.
You like shoot people in the head when they're having a shit in the toilet in the air vent, and I'm just like, this sounds interesting.
shooting that dude who was on the toilet and just being like, oh, you poor bastard. I felt so bad for him.
Straight away, you were there. You were James Bond. You were playing James Bond, and that was it.
Definitely the first time, just sticking the cartridges, turning it on, and it was that audio cue. Shoom. And then you knew your life was different.
When I got that cartridge finally at home, literally, I played throughout the night.
My friend and I rented it like that first weekend it was out, and it was just all we did.
I just spent the whole weekend playing GoldenEye.
There was only one copy of GoldenEye left in the Toys R Us shelves in Chatswood, and I remember I bought the game first because I didn't want anyone else to have that game.
4 of us playing. There would be 4 behind the couch waiting to play. There would be 3 more making sandwiches in the kitchen. There'd be another 2 turning up after school. That's what we did. We played GoldenEye for 2 years straight.
Here is your spy playground.
You felt like you were somewhere and you were actually going towards something and, you know, working towards a proper goal in a real place.
I remember the sense of wonder, just walking through the dam for the first time and sort of feeling the big open spaces that actually felt like big open spaces.
That's the freedom that keeps you coming back.
I'm so glad they had the vision to go, what if we just took James Bond off the rails and give the player the ability to run around and do what they want?
You know, running into this gate and going like, where do I go? Pulling out your gun, shooting the lock, it blew our minds at the time.
If you played it like you played Doom, you'd fail the mission. You have to use your brain, and like, I think that's what helped it spread.
It was the game everyone wanted to play. Like, growing up as a PlayStation player, and my friends who had 64s, we were just filled with jealousy that we could not play a game that was that good.
I don't think I really appreciated at the time just how much enthusiasm the game, the game generated.
I think the enemies really brought that game to life.
Occasionally walk around a corner and just find one that I know scratching their bum or something like that. Really bizarre, but that little detail made a change.
Everyone says it, but the animations, like, oh, you've shot him in the hand, he's shaking it around. We shoot him in the knee or the bum cheek, and he clenches it. Brilliant, like, #1. Then you shoot the hats off and you think, what else can this game do?
You could use your silencer and take out enemies without alerting other guards. You could take out the security cameras. These stealth mechanics really hadn't been seen, especially in the first-person shooter genre.
Like, guards were on routes and everything, and you could memorize them, and you'd know when you would see their head pop up, like, over a snow dune, and when you could shoot them. Like, I felt like I was being sneaky for the first time in a game.
Some of the greatest memories I have is getting through that level in a certain time limit and doing certain conditions to unlock certain things. The feeling of achieving that was great.
If you wanted to extend the life of the game as a player, you earned that extension rather than buying it and downloading it, right? And it was always in there.
I got every single one of them except Facility, which was just so difficult.
You have to have Dr. Doak in the right place at the right time.
You're having the run of your life. Like, you could never bank on Dr. Doak being in the right spot. It was just the biggest bunch of bullshit of all time.
Yeah, I think always shoot him and then feel slightly bad about it, but it's fun and you can get away with it, so why not?
I think there's a certain magic that happens that GoldenEye taught all of us. That sitting shoulder to shoulder with somebody on a couch, even if we're on 2 separate TVs, playing something, getting the reaction, feeling the energy, right, is a magical moment.
All you needed was one Nintendo 64, one copy of the game, 4 controllers, and a TV. The idea that you could all play on one screen, all 4 of you racing down corridors, sniping each other, laughing your heads off. It was as much fun for an audience as it was for the players. It was just hysterical to watch.
GoldenEye came out and it brought everyone out of their rooms, out of their bedrooms, into the lounge room together, shoulder to shoulder, having a great time.
It was some of the best times of my life, just with my friends.
What was great was it was so customizable.
Custom matches in the one-shot kills, mount the golden gun, slappers only.
You'd go to play GoldenEye at a friend's house and you'd choose Odd Job and everyone would just, and the guy in the corner of the room would stop playing the piano and everything like that. It was just not done.
You'd be the smallest one and you'd
fight to play Oddjob.
Anyone who chose Oddjob was the biggest asshole in the lounge room.
It just made it all the more fun, all the more social, and it kind of made me look forward to actually hanging out with my family, which I don't do so much now.
Gaming really is inherently social. The first games that were commercial were in arcades where you'd have to go out and be among other people. Sometimes your friends, sometimes you'd meet complete strangers. And they kind of recreated that arcade feeling of standing behind the players at the controls, putting your quarter on the dash and saying, I got next.
After GoldenEye, every FPS that came out, people are asking what kind of multiplayer modes, how are you handling split screen, how does it run?
GoldenEye became the game that set the gold standard for first-person shooters on console. It was the template that the genre would follow on consoles going forward.
The interactive title of the year is GoldenEye.
Getting a BAFTA was awesome. Yeah, especially because at the interactive Oscars, Martin had to go up and give a speech and thank everybody for working on the team. And he mentioned all of the team members by name, and then he paused and he went, and don't let me bother. Because he'd forgotten him. That was a good moment.
So the whole team was there, and it was the first time they ran those awards, and we won 4 of them, including the top one. So we were pleased with that.
We got copies of those. We've all got copies of those. We had to pay for them, but we got copies of them, and they say copy on the back, but they are real BAFTAs, and they weigh a ton, and I'm very proud of them, and they sit in my living room, and they get polished once a year.
Looking back at it, I think there was a lot of talent on the team. You know, it's certainly some of the most talented people I've ever worked with were on that team.
I still don't really, you know, I don't believe it. So personally, I still couldn't do the connect between what was happening in the real world and, you know, what we just spent 2.5 years making.
And it's still like, wow, we did a really good job. We had no idea what we were doing.
Obviously, liked it. The critical acclaim's super nice to see. It was extra special, my first game. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it's the first box I had in my hand that was like, oh my God, I'm on this, you know. But I was slightly detached, I guess, towards the end of it.
GoldenEye kept winning awards. And at some point, it just, I don't know, it stopped being a thing that was very interesting because it just, yeah, it just won all the awards. One thing I do remember is on the walk back from the AIS Awards in Atlanta back to the hotel, I remember saying to the team, it's all downhill from here. We're never going to do anything else that's this successful. At that point, we just won everything.
With the game on store shelves and the team taking a well-earned breather, the word on the street was spreading quickly. GoldenEye was the new game in town, an innovative, boundary-pushing cocktail of action-adventure. The game was a critical darling, ushering in new levels of innovation across areas including visuals, animation, sound, storytelling, and artificial intelligence. GoldenEye was innovative in so many ways, but one of the most significant was stealth. Rare replaced the search and destroy mentality of the Doom genre with mission objectives. From there on in, the bullet was no longer the only solution to every problem. This freedom of choice would have a long-lasting impact on the industry, challenging our expectations of what games could be and paving the way for a whole new genre of stealth games to emerge. It was official, James Bond had arrived in video games, selling 8 million copies, earning critical acclaim and a host of awards. Turns out, the world of international espionage was a perfect formula for video game success. The game was so successful, in fact, it even surpassed the film. Together, they would reignite the Bond franchise and introduced James Bond to a whole new generation. The big question would be, could future games live up to the bar set by GoldenEye?
Steven Spielberg's son, Max, was playing GoldenEye with his friends one day, and Spielberg walks past and looks at the telly. And at that time, I think he was just coming to the end of his work on Saving Private Ryan, and can immediately see the sort of creative synchronicity or potential between a video game like GoldenEye with a view through a first-person perspective and a period in history such as World War II. And immediately from there sort of asks the designers at Electronic Arts to mock up an idea of how they could perhaps remodel the Normandy landings, I believe, or D-Day, using a first-person shooter mechanics.
We all talk about the flying into the head, but that's such a subtle but important design decision that literally immerses you in okay, now you are in the role of James Bond. Now you are this character, and now we're gonna send you through this adventure.
No one had done something set in a realistic world where, you know, there were real things there. There were like tanks, there were jet aeroplanes, there were ships, there were like normal guns, like machine guns, silenced pistols, sniper rifles. Everything was recognizable, including the bad guys, obviously Russians a lot of the time. So all of a sudden we went from having all these fantastical elements to you had actually a real situation that you could identify with.
And that's something that has definitely, I think, impacted the single-player design team on Call of Duty. We never take you out of the role of that person you're playing. It is a first-person experience. Every action you do, whether you're climbing up an ice wall or whether you're, you know, in an explosion, you're shell-shocked and you're watching the events, you're watching it from the eyes of that person. And I think that's something that GoldenEye set the standard for, because they knocked it out of the park and they proved to us how effective that can be.
I think after GoldenEye, we saw more games, you know, moving away from hell demons and dragons and fantasy and recreating that kind of more realistic approach. Like if you think of the Tom Clancy's franchise, I think, you know, GoldenEye really showed everybody that you could have, you know, this kind of real world setting with like spies and you know, make it a success.
Metal Gear Solid was still like the next year, and all those stealth games like Thief and Tenchu. So they were all, you know, a year away or so.
GoldenEye and its ability to experiment becomes a progenitor for games like Thief the Dark Project, where it's entirely stealth-oriented.
GoldenEye was the first-person shooter that actually made PC developers notice the genre on console and say, oh, we need to do something like this too, or we'll get left behind.
Half-Life came out after GoldenEye, and it was interesting to hear the developers of Half-Life speak about how they were influenced by GoldenEye.
They delayed Half-Life to make sure that Half-Life's AI was up to snuff with GoldenEye's AI.
One of the things that GoldenEye in particular really sells are moving away not just from like old light gun games like Virtua Cop, but even established first-person shooter franchises like Doom, is it's the first game that really embodies systemic design. This idea that you can create a sandbox which can just be reduced to outright anarchy, where scientists are running away in panic because you're standing there with two clubs and shooting just relentlessly at a couple of soldiers who are then trying to hit an alarm, but you've also shot a barrel, which then causes this cascade of explosions throughout this room, and then that's catching scientists and killing them, or it's blowing up the guy that you're trying to hit. And these are things that you can't program that. You can only build the tools within the world that enable for these sorts of things to occur. And it's crazy because now so many big games try and embody systemic design. That is literally the blueprint that Far Cry runs on, that they want to have you be attacked by a tiger, but you're also on a paraglider, and then you can drop down and throw C4 in a Jeep, which lands on a civilian. Like, these are the things that now we're expecting. People jump into Red Dead Redemption 2 and they get really excited when someone gets kicked in the face by a horse. But GoldenEye, it was the first time we ever really saw something like that. And then subsequently, you can start manipulating that. And that becomes incredibly fun of, well, what happens if I try and lure the scientists in front of me because they're trying to run out the back door, but they're trying to attack me? And then can I get them to shoot the scientist? I wonder. And then you run off as your own little research scientist of your own, you're putting on your own white coat, like, let's see if we can just cause chaos. And it makes it insanely replayable.
You can draw a direct line, I think, from GoldenEye to Halo.
I would argue that Halo Combat Evolved wouldn't be what it was if it weren't for GoldenEye. I think it followed kind of the structure of what GoldenEye was in terms of these larger open levels, in terms of this kind of free-flowing 3D movement and letting you kind of explore the level at your own kind of pace. I think that influenced things like Halo, and then Halo inspired Call of Duty and all the others. Like, it all leads on, it all influences each other.
After GoldenEye, we all thought Rare would make another Bond game. I mean, you roll the credits on GoldenEye, it says James Bond will return, and obviously that's what the movies do, but we all hoped that Rare was saying, hey, we had a blast making this game, we're gonna give you another FPS like GoldenEye, maybe for the next Pierce Brosnan movie. Didn't happen.
We were going to do the next Bond license, that was the plan, but because GoldenEye sort of reinvigorated the franchise, suddenly the money went up. Suddenly it's like, well, if you want to do this, you're going to have to pay for it.
The movie license wasn't that expensive the first time round, as I understand it. Obviously, with the success of GoldenEye, then the price goes up. And we were told quite early on that it's unlikely we would do the next one because they weren't going to get the license. You're slightly disappointed. You also sort of actually, probably it's better to do our own thing now.
Well, we know how to make a video game now, so we're just going to make a better one.
It's actually really hard to do spiritual successors, to actually encapsulate or capture what were the magic qualities of that particular game.
Can you recreate something like that? Can you, catch the lightning in a bottle twice? It was very much a product of the time.
People have tried that. It's super, 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 super hard.
GoldenEye kind of set up this expectation, I think, with audiences that, these Bond games are going to be, or at least should be, as good as GoldenEye. Like, Rare set the standard, and so there was just this expectation in place.
After GoldenEye, the history of Bond games is very, very erratic.
I didn't quite realize how big of a deal it was that Rare lost the rights to Bond. In that, I heard that Tomorrow Never Dies was coming out.
Tomorrow Never Dies had a tie-in on the PlayStation, and I think that was PlayStation hoping that, GoldenEye did gangbusters for Nintendo. Tomorrow Never Dies will do the same for us.
Sweet, it's the sequel to GoldenEye. And I remember getting that and playing it and being like, this is not GoldenEye at all. This is nothing close to, I don't know, they really screwed up. I mean, not knowing that it was a completely different team, different everything.
You're running around levels, you're running around sets of the film, but it wasn't quite as accurate as Rare had managed.
I remember reading reviews of Tomorrow Never Dies and thinking that's too bad.
You had The World's Not Enough afterwards, which kind of okay, let's not mess with the GoldenEye formula. Clearly, James Bond works in first person, and we'll do another first-person shooter. And it was good, but it was another developer, and it didn't quite have the same Rare magic. I think it did feel very kind of A to B, very kind of linear.
And I remember thinking that okay, this has got to be the GoldenEye that I wanted. And it's like, that's not it either. And then I found out, okay, the team that made that is making this game called Perfect Dark, and that's the closest you're going to get to GoldenEye.
Welcome to 2023.
So Perfect Dark came along in 2000, and it was Rare's second effort in this realm of first-person shooter, and it was highly anticipated. You did it right the first time. Let's just do that again. Just give me more of that.
A big thing with Perfect Dark was escaping what we saw as the confines of the GoldenEye universe.
We could make up the storyline, we could make up the characters, we could do whatever the hell we wanted with it. We could make it darker, we could make it bigger, we could go into space. We could have laser pistols. That was the point. We could do anything we wanted with this one because we weren't restricted.
And then you're on to the next thing. So after GoldenEye, we were doing Perfect Dark, and we were going to make this game so much better than GoldenEye.
Perfect Dark certainly feels like an evolution of GoldenEye. It clearly is. It still feels very similar, but obviously everything has opened up.
In a lot of ways, it was the kind of sequel that the fans wanted. It doubled down on the multiplayer aspect. You had bots, you had much more customization you could do in the multiplayer, lots more weapons, just a huge array of things. But then it went kind of off the rails, like Indiana Jones 4 style with aliens and stuff like that. I don't know, it got a little silly.
The big fight we had myself and Martin and others on the team, we really wanted to have a female character.
Jeanne d'Arc, yes. Joan of Arc, that's where it comes from originally, and that was Dr. Doak's idea.
Just because it was such a misogynist industry. It's nice to look back on that and to think that we kind of got to push something there because we had some clout at the time.
Perfect Dark sold a little over 2 million copies, I think, as compared with GoldenEye's 8 million.
The debate between whether GoldenEye or Perfect Dark is the better game is a very complicated one, and there's going to be lots of people on each side of the fence.
You can break Perfect Dark really badly. I mean, you can do stuff that brings the game to a crawl.
Although certainly what they were doing with bots and stuff was incredible. There are a lot of features, like the counter-operative stuff was amazing. There were so many great ideas in it, but I think for me it just didn't come out at the right time.
GoldenEye just never left the machine as a multiplayer. And even though Perfect Dark has more stuff going on in it in terms of AI, weapons, laptop guns, you know, it has more. But again, when it comes to a quick plug-and-play session with your mates, less is more, you know?
Right here, it's this one. My insane pace. I wait. Right when he starts firing, to try to back push me, the double. Body armor. 2 quick ones. I already know I'm getting there on the perfect line. Dude, what a rush! What a rush! What a run.
My friends, hello and welcome to GoldenEye Speed Lore, a series where we look at the speedrun world record progression of a stage in GoldenEye and the stories. So speedrunning is the act of trying to beat a video game or a part of a video game as quickly as possible. And it might sound crazy to some, but it's kind of this additional challenge that anyone can do in a game.
The cheat system in GoldenEye was one of the things that really drove the initial desire to beat the levels fast, because you had to clear a level on a particular difficulty under a certain time in order to unlock the cheat.
Speedrunning now, after the 2010 or even the mid-2000s, started getting in popularity, but GoldenEye was big from the start.
When I took over the website, I was updating all of the records by hand, literally by editing HTML files. And so people would send me emails with all of their new records, and then I would go and manually insert them. When I was 15 years old, it was a big part of who I was.
If you achieve a good time, you can go online and say, hey, I did this. And then people who also share that same passion can give you some attention and respect.
All these teenagers came together in the late 90s, early 2000s, and became lifelong friends.
When you get a really good, new, untied world record that no one's ever had before, it almost feels like exploring new lands.
You would finish the level and there would be like, your heart would skip 2 beats, and then you would press A and you'd be like, did I get it? And you'd be like,
You're the only person in the world to see those numbers on the end screen of the game. You're it.
It was this sort of psychological catnip that led to this addictive kind of obsessive cycle with the game.
There are very few things that beat that rush still today, I can say that.
Like, what would lead a person to play the same stage 1,000 times in a row?
You see a lot of guys who maybe, they're not at the best place in their life at the time. Maybe they've just lost a job or gotten out of a relationship, or, maybe they're a bit downtrodden. Speedrunning can be a natural kind of place of comfort to give them a sense of direction and focus to carry on.
Fresh off the success of GoldenEye and deep into production of Perfect Dark, the unthinkable happened. Several key members of the team, Hilton, Norgate, Doak, and Ellis, left the company, setting off to form a new studio, Free Radical Design.
So we started off with myself, Dave Doak, Carl Hilton, Graham Norgate, and Lee Ray, who all left Rare roughly at the same time, and we started in April '99.
It was a hugely difficult decision in some respects. I mean, on the one hand, I think we were all ready to go and do Free Radical, and we were all very excited by the idea of Free Radical, and we all knew we were young and confident enough that we thought, oh, it's going to be, yeah, we'll do this, it'll be a great success, it'll be fine, you know.
It was a thing that I was thinking about for a while after GoldenEye. I don't know. I mean, we were young and naive, and we kind of felt like we'd done it all ourselves, which in retrospect, I now realize that there will have been things going on behind the scenes that we were unaware of that allowed us to have the time that we had to make that game good.
With their stock high, they signed an exclusive deal with publisher Eidos to develop a game for a new console, the Sony PlayStation 2. The new game would be Time Splitters, but could it live up to the standard they had set with GoldenEye?
PlayStation 2 was around the corner. As soon as Eidos had signed us up, you know, then it was straight to Sony. It's like, look, we're going to make another game. It's going to be a multiplayer. I think your console was clearly going to be a great console to do it on. And then Sony was super supportive, and yes, suddenly we had dev kits in our office.
We were all super excited about Free Radical, and then after we played Time Splitters, we really liked what we saw.
We were the only European developed launch title, you know, so that was a very quick sort of, here's a fun game. Not much to it, but it's got all these bits and pieces, and have a bit of fun with it.
When we made the Time Splitters games with Free Radical, it was kind of like, we want to do Chocolate Box, we want to do everything. So that's those games were that. I mean, Time Splitters, original Time Splitters was multiplayer game, let's throw everything and see what sticks.
I think a lot of fans went to Time Splitters and said, oh my God, this brings back all the memories from GoldenEye and the way it feels. But what Free Radical did with that game is just speed it up.
It was all about immediacy and accessibility, pick up and play. You should just be able to start playing, choose a bunch of settings that you fancy that time, and have fun straight away.
There was no great design document for Time Splitters at the start that said this is the game and this is how it's going to work and this is what things you're going to do.
It just had such a nice feel to it, and you could pick it up and play it without a whole lot of learning for it as well, which means you can get people who aren't so big a gamers in on it, and you can actually have your 4-player split screen and everybody's having fun.
It wasn't representative of what we were capable of, it was representative of what we had enough time to do. So Time Splitters 2 was where we wanted to show what we could do.
Time Splitters 2 was obviously our chance to do it properly, and we had more time, and the first one had been successful, so Eidos were happy for us to spend a bit more money and a bit more time making a more detailed one with a proper story and a bit more character development in it.
And they were quite hands-off. That's a thing that was also true of GoldenEye, and I think that's a thing that makes a big difference to the end result of a project.
The Time Splitters series would go on to be one of the most successful franchises on the PlayStation 2, selling over 3.5 million copies on the system and earning a dedicated and passionate fan base. Throughout the mid-2000s, Free Radical Design would go on to create titles like Second Sight for the PS2 and Haze for the PS3.
After we finished Time Splitters, LucasArts approached us and said they'd like us to make a Star Wars game.
It was a hugely fun thing to be working on. And obviously the team was stoked because we got access to all of the great, resources and history of Star Wars. And
I can remember it just being an absolute joy to go to work. We were making what we wanted to make. We personally felt vested in it because we owned the business and we were creating our thing.
Back at Rare, change was in the air. The Nintendo deal had reached its end and Rare needed a new partner. Companies like Activision and Microsoft were circling, and for the successful bidder, the spoils would be Rare's reputation and its passionate fan base. For Rare, it was an opportunity to secure the long-term viability of the company, but it wouldn't be without risk. The Rare faithful would have to hold their breath as giant corporations moved in.
owners of the company and the founders, Chris and Tim Stamper, put the company up for sale. And they're looking to find a buyer. Microsoft's interested, Activision is interested, and Nintendo is interested. And I think a lot of the staff were like, well, you know, hopefully we'll be acquired fully by Nintendo. But Nintendo's CEO at the time gives them a valuation that's way, way lower than what they're after. And Activision puts in a big bid. So it looks for a moment that they're going to go with Activision, and then for one reason or another, that deal falls through.
When Microsoft bought Rare 2002, I believe it was, I think they lost a little bit. I think some people at Rare would kind of agree with that. Case in point, that's when you started to see people leave Rare and form Free Radical. Microsoft wanted to really push Kinect and really want to push this kind of hands-free control thing. But you had Kinect Sports, Kinect Adventure, all these kind of games that people just didn't feel were Rare. You didn't feel that Rare quality about it because they were minigame collections, and that's not really what Rare did. Rare built worlds.
I left Rare because I became less enamored with it at the time. After Tim and Chris left, that was it for me. I liked them being there. When they left, I left that long after that. I didn't want to be there really anymore.
For a long time, we described that as the best publisher relationship we'd ever had. It was working really, really well. It was going so well that not long after that, they asked us to also start working on the sequel at the same time. In order to do that, we had to grow the company.
As it got bigger and bigger, more time was kind of spent on the dealing with the frictions that you have with particularly with publishers.
It was 2.5 years, but I mean the amount of money in at that point would have been 8 figures.
The funding model then was publisher advances, and if you have a good publisher relationship, then you're safe. But that relationship is always got some conflict in it.
It got to the point where we were doing milestones every month and sending them off, and if the publisher didn't like what they saw, we wouldn't get paid. Our burn rate was astronomical, so it doesn't take much for the wheels to come off.
But unfortunately, the story was not a great one. Obviously, the studio running into trouble with Battlefront development.
That becomes quite difficult if that goes on for more than a few months, because everyone needs to get paid.
When it came to the end of the year, well, we had to put the company into administration.
That was gutting,
In almost every publisher we worked with, there was some degree of conflict. And that took us down in the end.
Today is a culmination of about 3 years of planning. We're filming an actual real film called Bringing Back GoldenEye.
I'm Dan Guest. I'm the director of Bringing Back GoldenEye, the mockumentary written by Jim Miskell, all about the GoldenEye World Championships.
It was the first thing I'd ever been good at, never mind a game, and I was amazing at it. So I've written 2 films about GoldenEye now, this is the second one. First was Going for GoldenEye. I made it myself, basically, wrote it, directed it, produced it, made the costumes, edited it. I did everything apart from hold the camera, hold the boom, and act in it, basically. And I'd never do that ever again. It was very stressful. Grant Kirkhope said it was the film of the year, which, what more could you want, really? David Doak compared it to Spinal Tap, King of Kong. I'm really happy that the Rare guys liked it. I'm really proud of it just because I did it. At the end of the day, a lot of people can say they're gonna do stuff, but I put my money where my mouth is, and I went through and did it, and I saw it all the way through. But now I've hired a lovely crew and producers and everything, and lots of lovely actors, and yeah, they're making an awesome film.
It's written by a massive fan. Jim's just written a great story with a lot of little inside jokes, and obviously David Doak's involved, and it's just a great nostalgia trip for fans of the game.
What we're filming these next couple of days is the World Championships interior parts of the film. There'll be 100 extras in, and we've got a stage full of new competitors and characters. So it's going to be a big day, and David Doak from the GoldenEye team's coming to present the trophy. And she's just mind-blowing, because I've shot that guy in the head so many times in the facility. I guess the legacy of GoldenEye is the fans, you know, and what they do with those memories and how they keep it alive. I mean, like, look what's going on here. Like, to me, like, I guess I'm hopefully contributing to the legacy of GoldenEye, and people enjoy what I'm doing because, you know, I think it's important that we tell stories based on video games. You know, we're the first couple of generations where that's our entertainment. So I'm celebrating this game that's a big part of my life.
It's really interesting when you look at the James Bond games that came after GoldenEye. The Eurocom Bond games were pretty competent. Some of the more vehicular-based, like some of the other ones, were trying to do some of the stuff that GoldenEye did but failed.
GoldenEye is the one that people keep coming back to. When in doubt, do a GoldenEye. So EA did this with GoldenEye Rogue Agent. You work for the villains and there's kind of almost like a mob war, like you're working for the villains as they kind of fight against each other. And it was called GoldenEye because he actually has a golden eye. And Activision did the same thing after Quantum of Solace, which was basically a Call of Duty with a bit of a Bond skin. They did the GoldenEye 007 reimagining for Wii to try and tap in that nostalgia, because that's the game that people remember, that's the game that people love.
Who here would say that it's one of the greatest shooters of all time?
Everybody. Set the standards. And the problem is, as good as some of these games were, none of them match GoldenEye.
Nobody ever got close to kind of bringing home that magic again.
I think by calling it GoldenEye and then releasing a game that is not in beat or in tune with what made GoldenEye so special, I think upset a lot of people. I think a lot of people were expecting a one-to-one remake, but that's not what they got. The XBLA remake, for a lot of us, we had heard rumblings about it.
It sounds like it was almost at 100%. Like, it sounds like it was pretty much ready to go.
It was written about, absolutely, by every major gaming publication, and it even actually did hit a couple of mainstream press as well.
Yes, I was there. I was part of the staff when the news broke about a GoldenEye release for the Xbox Live Arcade. I think what made the Rare employee want to do it, I don't think it had anything to do with anger. I don't think it had anything to do with spite. I think it was the intention was to get it out there so that the world could see it.
Just the way in those leaks were released by almost like a double agent.
It's such a shame that we never got the GoldenEye HD remake that was rumoured for Xbox 360, I think it was. So it was going to be a HD version of GoldenEye 64, all the levels you remember, but with kind of much, much more realistic graphics and online multiplayer. And the problem is, at the time, it was such a legal mess.
So we're talking, 3-4 companies that need to all see eye to eye and get a proper piece of that pie.
Microsoft owned Rare, and Rare owned the game. Except GoldenEye 64 was published by Nintendo, so Nintendo had the rights to that game because Rare worked for them and was licensed, it was all licensed then. Except Activision at the time had the James Bond license. It just became this mess of you've got three companies arguing over who does and doesn't have the rights to it, and it meant that ultimately it never came out.
people who grew up on GoldenEye are now trying to make the remake that they didn't get. I mean, we had the Quake engine, the Doom engine that we, and you saw some impressive mods that were being made from those engines. But then Source Engine came along.
GoldenEye Source is this project that is totally fan-made, that is built on the Source engine by Valve, so the engine that ran Half-Life 2.
GoldenEye Source is a remake of the multiplayer component of GoldenEye.
They have essentially reimagined the GoldenEye levels to be remastered to make it look more like the movie, higher res textures, higher polygon count models. All the weapons are redone, sound effects and music even, and all in the spirit of let's get our favorite kind of couch deathmatch game online so that we can play it, with people from all over the world.
So we didn't get the remake that we wanted. We constantly hear these rumblings in the industry about how there is a GoldenEye out there remake that is done. It's just not being released.
The inability for the corporations to figure out a way to get a remastered version of GoldenEye out has created a vacuum into which fans have fallen, and they're making their own projects, their sort of black label versions. And
I'm Curtis Higgins. I am co-creator of GoldenEye Source. GoldenEye Source is an adaptation of the original Nintendo 64 game. We started in 2004. The team has touched all corners of the globe. We currently have members from Canada, US, Switzerland, UK, Spain, Australia, Brazil.
says something about the fondness that people hold for this game, that they would dedicate so much of their time to recreating it, either for their own pleasure, but also probably for younger generations.
The cool thing about indie development is you can either make something yourself or get one or two or three or half a dozen of your friends and build something with tools that are free or cheap and widely available.
You can learn how to 3D model with free open source software now. You can learn, Unreal Engine, Unity. These are free to play around with game engines.
So now we have these tools, these game development tools that we never had before. What's interesting to see is how these tools are being utilized by people who grew up playing GoldenEye.
And so that democratization of the tools is kind of leveling this whole field and making these projects possible.
In the end, it's just a group of people who absolutely love the original game, and they just wanted to bring an updated, modern version to people who love it.
No other game that you play where you're playing, Call of Duty or another game, and you're like, oh, I really hate the way this happens. All of a sudden, a developer or somebody pops up and goes, oh, I'll change that next week. Next thing you know, all the problems you had with the game are now fixed.
It's those teams that are kind of off the leash and can do what they want without fear of, failing any focus tests or anything like that.
Sometimes I feel like the corporatization of it all has sucked a bit of the creativity out of it. That's what I feel. I like that kind of gamers making games for gamers model. I kind of feel that's a great way to do it.
We've had a few members, they reached out to Dr. Doak on Twitter. We arranged a session where we were able to play. He came in, we played with him, he played with the team. We were only expecting him to play for about an hour, and he ended up staying for about 5 hours. It was definitely a dream of mine to show my work to an original developer. Modding provides an outlet for your creativity. It allows you to try and fail, and you just get to have fun.
GoldenEye is still very alive and well in the modding scene. When Elon Musk unveiled the Cybertruck, I mean, it was like a day or two after that someone modded the truck into the streets level and even had a low poly Elon Musk in there that actually spoke to the character in the game. It's like, it's just so wonderful that kind of stuff is out there.
The GoldenEye modding scene has really exploded with so many different custom levels. There's new sounds, there's new characters, there's new weapons, there's new music.
One of the things I really love about GoldenEye 007 is that there's still this community around the world. They're making mods for the game.
What people can do nowadays is practically endless. It's constantly evolving. What you see one year, the next year will be even greater. There's mods where people have completely changed the style of the game, the time frame, the genre, and making World War type games where you might still be Bond, but you're taking on Nazis and you're going through old hangars and streets, and you're using these classic weapons that sound extremely realistic and accurate to the original representation. But then there's other ones that base themselves on something completely different.
Everything in the game, from wall textures to weapons to characters to items, has been changed.
It still has the same physics and controls and engine, but it takes on a whole new life.
These projects are just, they're amazing efforts, and it's all in these small modding communities where they crop up.
It's a very close-knit community, and that's awesome. A lot of people willing to share and promote other people's projects, and keen to see other people in industry and other developers' projects do really well.
We were all helping each other. Anybody would come up with an idea, and if they didn't have the thought process of how to possibly do it, they might pass it on to somebody else who is more experienced, and they can try it out, and they have different opinions of their own. And we were all just kind of banking off each other to come up with as many cool new discoveries as we could, and it just really blew the game apart.
When you want to talk about the future of gaming and the company or group of people who are going to move the needle or take the next evolutionary step, it probably won't be AAA.
I think innovation has now moved from AAA to the indie scene, because the indie scene is basically what Rare was back in the 90s. It's small teams, pretty inexperienced, doing it out of the love for making something that they want to make.
In 2012, following the lackluster 007 Legends, Activision abandoned the Bond license. James Bond would be absent from video game store shelves for nearly 10 years, and discovering the magic formula of GoldenEye's success remains elusive to this day.
Nobody ever got close to kind of bringing home that magic again. And that's, that's because maybe it was everybody tried to take what GoldenEye had created and try to replicate it. And so it kind of felt like more up to date, but kind of cheaper copies of GoldenEye. What we didn't see was a lot of innovation in the newer Bond games that really kind of maybe also adapted with what James Bond was becoming in the Pierce Brosnan era.
I often say that, when I'm explaining to newcomers to the industry, that I think a lot of great games are not necessarily the result of a great person in charge or a great team making the game, but they kind of reflect a great environment that allows them the flexibility to experiment.
It was about 8 people. In my experience, later in the games industry was once you get to teams which are bigger than, say, the size of a sports team, that network of interpersonal connections gets fuzzier. And also you end up with a hierarchy because you have to have some kind of production hierarchy. So people don't feel that empowered. Anyone on the team could have an idea, and within an hour we could all have discussed it. So we were very agile.
You definitely feel the presence of corporations a lot more. A lot of the most prominent UK developers are owned by massive publishers or have been owned and shut down by massive publishers. Rare is owned by Microsoft. And all right, they're allowed to do their own thing, but they are very much doing their own thing on Microsoft's payroll.
Things have become a little bit more corporate and safe, and then generally I think that's true of all game development. Some of the risks that are taken in GoldenEye just wouldn't fly in this day and age. And going back to that inexperienced team, small team, movie license, even the freedom that they had with the license these days wouldn't happen. To be able to kind of include stuff from previous Bond films, characters, to actually go on the movie set, photograph everything. Going back to that idea of perfect storm, everything kind of just aligned to create this wonderful experience.
The size of their team in many respects was a strength. They didn't have the problem of having sort of too many chefs. They didn't really have the problem of too many layers of management that a lot of AAA games have these days. And they didn't really have anyone telling them what they should do. Or more importantly, they didn't really have anyone telling them what they couldn't do. So they just did everything and they just found a way.
Everything that I've done since obviously comes from the fact that Martin Hollis walked into my room that morning and I said yes. And I shudder when I think about what would have happened if I'd gone,
When people are successful, they're generally successful because they worked hard and they have ability, but they've always been lucky. That's the thing that they don't tell you.
If you didn't have any one of us on the actual team, you wouldn't have got the same game.
It was a great project to work on because it was a small, close-knit team who were working with a great license. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. We had enormous fun.
It was the right people at the right people at the right time. It really was. Like the fact we all love Bond, I love Bond, we all just love Bond, So you just put the extra effort in, didn't you?
People keep coming up to me and telling me I've changed their childhood. Or taken their childhood.
It's surreal that after all this time, it's still a thing that we're talking about. It was the first thing that I did after leaving uni. It was literally more than half of my life ago. And here we are talking about it.
Over 23 years in or something, and people still remember it fondly and have questions about it.
Although it frustrates the hell out of me that that's the only thing people remember you for, It's still nice that you've done that thing and people go, that was my game,
GoldenEye in one word for me is fun. Simple as that, and that was just fun to play from start to finish.
Bond. It's just so very, very Bond.
One word. Evolutionary in terms of video games and me. It evolved me, it changed me. It changed exactly who I am now. It's, no other video game will get the chance to do that again.
But there was something very special that some kind of spark, some kind of life that GoldenEye had that these other Bond games didn't quite get as close as they came.
Even 20 years later, there's a certain, je ne sais quoi about it, but if somebody has a better answer, I'd be very interested in that.
And I'm so glad that I am my age now, because I don't want to sound like patronising or condescending, but if you've got a multiplayer game, just go around your friend's house and play it. Don't play it online. I sound really old, but just sit next to them on a couch with 2 other people, or 5 people, or 6 people, and just enjoy the game as well as your bodies being next to each other.
You hear all these stories about how people have met, and Dave was halfway across the world, and because of our mutual love of a game, we happened to meet, and that's insane.
GoldenEye Source became this big thing, and then that brought us together now that we're young adults, and now we're married, have a house. Because of that game.
To think that if we had never met in that game, we'd never have met in person. It just keeps coming back into our lives in some kind of degree.
It grabbed people, and I've seen people come and go, and they come back, and they come back, and they come back because they can't stay away from it. They might go away from it for a couple of years, but something about it always pulls them back in.
In the office at IGN, every day we would boot up GoldenEye at the end of the day, and then people would forget to go home.
It's lovely that people still loved it. It's lovely that we had such an effect that people clearly enjoyed playing it so much. You don't think about that when you're making it. We were having fun playing it. We knew we liked it. and you hope that other people will like it.
It's just this entire era for me of just having fun with a game that you bought and there wasn't anything else to buy for it. No microtransactions, no expansions. Everybody had the same game. You just had to sit in front of the console, pick up a controller, and away you go.
Like, some people stormed out the house, like, almost in tears that they lost GoldenEye matches, you know what I mean? Because they were like, yeah, I'm the best at GoldenEye. I'll come around Wheels on Saturday and see what happens. You got destroyed, didn't you? Yeah. And they just walk away and you're like, see you next week? Yeah. See you.
Back in 2007, there was a full-on GoldenEye remake going to be put out on Xbox Live Arcade, and it didn't
In early 2021, something remarkable happened. The shelved GoldenEye remake leaked onto the internet. After being locked away for over a decade, a full playthrough of the much-anticipated remake was streamed online by the world's most prominent GoldenEye streamer, Grazlu00. Almost a quarter of a century after its release, players all around the world came together once again to reconnect over their favorite game. Global news outlets beamed fresh GoldenEye news into living rooms as the rights holders could only watch on as the sales the remake might have made vanished. Deep into the 21st century, nearly 25 years after its original release, the impact is undeniable. Rare's GoldenEye 007 lives on.